Hi, I'm NASA astronaut, retired Air Force Colonel Ron Guerin, along with my crewmate, retired Air Force Colonel Mike Fossum. As we pause to mark the 10th anniversary of the attacks on our nation that occurred on September 11th, 2001, the crew of the International Space Station stands united in paying its respects to the victims of 9/11, those who perished that day, and those who lost families and friends in New York City, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C.
We also want to remember the sacrifices made by the first responders who ignored the dangers and ran toward the destruction and the devastation that was visible even from here, the International Space Station, by Commander Frank Culbertson and the crew of Expedition 3. We want to pay tribute to the tens of thousands of men and women who have volunteered to defend us in countries far from home. Today, we have a safer, stronger, and far more resilient America.
Our thoughts and prayers are with our military personnel as they continue to serve around the world in the name of freedom, and with the survivors of that fateful day, their families, and their friends.
Good morning. Senator Nelson, Representative Fatah, Representative Palazzo, Mr. Fogg, Captain Culbertson, and distinguished guests, thank you for joining the NASA community in our commemoration of the events of September 11th, 2001. NASA joins the rest of the nation reflecting on the events that took place 10 years ago in Washington, D.C., New York City, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. As we think about the sacrifices that took place on that day in the United States and in the years that followed in foreign lands, let us also take a moment for gratitude towards those who currently serve our country, both at home and abroad, for the safety and well-being of all Americans. We are privileged to have with us today several of those people, our distinguished guests, who serve our nation daily. Please rise for the singing of the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
The first of our slate of distinguished speakers is Administrator Charles Bolden. Nominated by President Obama, retired Marine Corps Major General Charles Frank Bolden, Jr. began his duties as NASA Administrator in July 2009. His U.S. Senate confirmation marks the beginning of his second stint with the nation's space agency, his 34-year military career having included 14 years as a member of NASA's Astronaut Office. After joining NASA in 1980, he traveled to orbit 4 times aboard the Space Shuttle, commanding 2 of the missions. Administrator Bolden.
Good morning. Good morning to all of you, and thanks to all of you for coming together as NASA joins the nation and the world in making the 10th anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attack on our country. I especially want to recognize New York City first responder Matthew Fogg and 3 members of Congress who are with us today. Florida Senator Bill Nelson, who, by the way, was one of my crew members on the 1986 Columbia shuttle mission STS-61C. Senator Nelson. Pennsylvania Representative Shaka Fattah, and Mississippi Representative Stephen Palazzo. Thank you very much. On this solemn occasion, we pause to remember the lives of those we lost that tragic day, and to offer comfort to families they left behind. We also salute the survivors and the many brave first responders who ran directly into the face of danger to save lives. As you will hear later, from the very first moments of the tragedy, members of the NASA family have played a part in the recovery and healing of our nation. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station were able to photograph the devastation of that terrible day, which could be seen even as far away as the vantage point of low Earth orbit. The photos taken by the only American off the planet at that time, Frank Culbertson, who you will meet later, are an historic reminder that this small dot in the universe still has big challenges to overcome. America's first responders and many ordinary people became heroes on 9/11, and our government has continued since that day to take the steps that have kept our nation safe. More than 2 million of our troops have served in war zones. These brave volunteers are protecting our nation beyond its borders and preventing threats before they can reach our shores. They have upheld the virtues of service, sacrifice, and selflessness that have always been the source of America's strength. As the beneficiaries of their service, we have a sacred duty to support all of our troops, the military families, and veterans. America is a different place since that fateful day. But NASA's subsequent human and science missions have demonstrated how space exploration can bring our world together, erase borders, and improve the lives of people across the world. We will never forget 9/11, but we are nevertheless optimistic about the future. Part of my optimism is fueled by the potential of NASA's commitment to ongoing cooperative exploration that will inspire humanity and lift our thoughts to the higher potential of which we are capable. NASA is uniquely positioned to continue building bridges in a global enterprise that helps us uncover the secrets of our planet and the universe and bring scientists, engineers, and explorers from all walks of life together, no matter their race, religion, national origin, or background. This is the legacy not only of NASA, it is a path that all of us must pursue to the future. Again, I want to thank you all for participating in NASA's Day of Remembrance. Our nation's unity and the many ways we help each other through adversity is one of our greatest assets. We are resilient. Our nation draws strength from diversity, and we can do whatever we set our mind to, not just because of our military power, but because of the power of our ideas, because who we are, one nation, dedicated to building a more perfect union. The families of the victims and the continued healing of our nation are foremost in our thoughts and prayers today. Let us join in remembrance and raise our sights to tomorrow's promise. And now, it's my distinct pleasure to bring to the podium my friend and former shuttle crewmate, Senator Bill Nelson.
Good morning to the NASA family. All of us will remember exactly where we were on that fateful day. Moments of tragedy such as that, including the loss of 2 space shuttles, etch into the mind the indelible imprint of memory, exactly where you were, what you were doing. On the early morning of September the 11th, 2001, I was on the west front of the United States Capitol building in a leadership meeting. We had actually tried to continue the meeting even after we knew that the World Trade Center had been hit, when suddenly someone burst in the door and said the Pentagon has been hit. We leapt immediately to the windows overlooking the mall, the west front of the Capitol, to see the black smoke rising across the Potomac. And then that memorable voice in my head continues as going out in the hallway, down the stairs, the Capitol Police were shouting at the top of their lungs, "Get out of the building, get out of the building, run, run, there's an inbound airplane." And of course, because that flight was delayed that morning, the passengers had a chance to find out what was happening. And they decided to storm that cockpit. And that took the plane down on that Pennsylvania field. Otherwise, its target was thought to be the west front of the United States Capitol building. Since September the 11th, the world has changed. Clearly, from our national security standpoint, we see that having come through the large landmass armies to protect us, we now move to a much more surgical, swift kind of protection. It used to be that we had the great privilege of having two big oceans that protected us. Now we know differently. And as you now see, our new modus operandi for protecting our interests, it's the marrying up of extensive, laborious, time-taking intelligence work married up with a swift, lethal, surgical, stealthy military strike, as best evidenced by the takedown of bin Laden. Since September the 11th, NASA has changed. This family has responded as patriotic Americans do so well in the pictures that we've just seen, in the honoring of country, in the contributions of scientific achievement. But NASA has changed also because NASA realizes that we can't do the things that we used to do the same old ways. Since 9/11 and the protection of the national interest, we now know that the engagement of protecting our interest on faraway lands cost a lot of money. And then with the near meltdown on Wall Street and the taking us down into a recession, trying to climb out of that, the governmental resources are harder to come by. Although the pie has not shrunk, clearly the difficulties of getting the slice of the pie are much more heightened. And therefore, NASA has changed as well to move to a new stable of rockets where we can continue our space program that is more efficient and more cost-effective and is safer. If you talk to the average American, this is a responsibility that we have in the NASA family to explain just how vigorous our space program is. The average American out there on the street they have the impression the space program's over. We're just getting cranked up. We just went to Jupiter. We just went to the moon. We're getting ready to go to Mars with a rover that is the size of a Volkswagen, that's got 6 wheels, that's got a pole that'll stick up and zap rocks with a laser. It's got a scooper. It's got a couple of eyes that'll pop up and we can see it real time. And it doesn't have to go to sleep in the Martian night. And we have a stable of rockets that are now in competition to deliver crew and cargo to the International Space Station. And then, pursuant to the legislation that was passed in the NASA authorization bill, signed into law by the President, we have a new stable of rockets that will eventually take us to the goal set by the President, and that is to go to the planet Mars. We have changed. The world has changed. We are safer, but we are not safe. And therefore, it calls on us and our colleagues, our fellow Americans, to keep the spirit of America going, to guard our cherished freedom, and in the process, keep the hope alive by doing what is in the heart of every American. Reach for the stars. Thank you.
Our next speaker is U.S. Representative Shaka Fattah of Pennsylvania. Representative Fattah is the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies of the House Committee on Appropriations. Congressman Fattah was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1994. Prior to his election to the U.S. Congress, he served as a representative in the Pennsylvania State House and as a Pennsylvania State Senator. Representative Fattah.
Well, it is indeed appropriate to pause and to reflect on the events some 10 years ago. And for NASA, I'd like to say that as the premier agency of its type anywhere in the world, you have played an important role in our nation's efforts to deal with the challenges relevant to that day. And I'll speak a little bit about that in a minute, but I recall a young president who went to Rice University and launched our nation onto an effort to conquer and explore space. And he said that we choose to go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard. You do very difficult work, and I want to congratulate the administrator and all of the staff and all of the employees that were part of the NASA family, along with the contractors, for the work that you do. Now, President Kennedy talked about our efforts in space that day, but a year earlier when he gave his inaugural address, he said that we would, as a nation, interact with others in the world, whether they meant us well or whether they meant us evil, that as a nation we would pay any price, bear any burden, and meet any challenge. Well, 10 years ago on 9/11, we had to be introduced to ourselves again and to face the adversity of that moment. And since that point, some 2 million have served in war zones These are 2 million Americans who have volunteered on behalf of their country. Over 6,000 have lost their lives. Tens of thousands have been injured. There are over 500,000 who have filed for various types of disability, veterans disability claims. We have spent and invested in these efforts significant sums of the public treasury. So it's clear that those words spoken in 1961 still resonate in the American soul. That is, that we are prepared to pay the price and to bear the burden. But I want to focus for a minute on NASA's role. I have a friend here who's the chief technologist. I understand he's trying to retire. Mr. Administrator, we should keep him here. But I want those who are engaged here at NASA to think and reflect for a minute about NASA's role. Because in our Predator drone program, there are aeronautics and technological advances that began here at NASA. And the helicopters that went into a sovereign country to go after Osama bin Laden, as the president promised during his campaign and followed through, that if we had actionable information, we would go wherever the trail of evidence took us to get bin Laden. And on those helicopters, there was technology that began in its infancy here at NASA. That when we saw the first responders respond at the Pentagon or in New York, the fire protective gear they wore were developed in conjunction with a project between NASA and FEMA and the firefighters so that our first responders could be better protected. When we look at the machinery that was used to cut through the rubble, the search for survivors, the life shares, again, developed in a partnership, as is NASA's normal mode of operation, in a partnership with a private sector company to develop the ability to use NASA's technological superiority to help meet the challenges. And that is used, it was used in the Oklahoma City bombing. It was used in New York at 9/11. So NASA has played an important role. And you're going to hear from Frank a little bit later on, so I don't want to steal his thunder, but you also had a unique view of what was taking place. But anything and everything connected to this effort that was focused at dealing with this challenge, there you can find in the work that NASA has done, a role that your work has played. And as we go forward as a nation, as we deal with other challenges, Senator Nelson mentioned that NASA has faced challenges with the loss of 2 of our shuttle flights. We know that there have been other terrorist attacks, like at Oklahoma City bombing. There have been events in our country's past, and there will be, in all likelihood, events that challenge all of us in our country's future. But if we would just hold firm to what that young president said, that we as a nation have to be prepared to bear the burden and to pay the price, we can turn tragedy into triumph. And we've done that by seeking out those responsible for 9/11. And, when the Oklahoma City bombing took place, federal installations had to become better protected, but they're open for business. When the church was bombed, the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, yes, precautions had to be taken, but Baptist churches open up every Sunday, and the doors are flung wide open all across our land. When we had the incident at Columbine High School, we didn't shut our schools down. tens of thousands of schools are open for business today so that we can develop a new generation of scientists and engineers that continue to propel our nation and NASA forward. And so is the case with the attacks of 9/11. Because no matter whether the view is from the space station or the view is right here on the ground, the entire world knows something with a certainty. And that is 10 years after 9/11, America is still open for business. We are still a nation that is committed in every respect to our ideals, and that we, as President Kennedy said, whether those who mean us well or those who mean us evil, they should be aware of our commitment to ourselves, to our nation, and to generations that will follow. Thank you.
Our next speaker is U.S. Representative Stephen Palazzo of Mississippi. Representative Palazzo is the chairman of the Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Congressman Palazzo was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2010. Prior to that, he served for 3 years in the Mississippi House of Representatives. Representative Palazzo.
September 11th, 2001 is a day that forever changed America. As I reflect on that terrible day, I feel the same patriotism and heartache I felt then. I think of the bagpipe processions for firefighters and policemen in New York honoring the lives of their fallen brothers and sisters. I think of the smoke plumes that were visible from the space station that billowed for days over the city, and the American flags we all proudly flew in front of our home. Thoughts from that day still stir emotions that inspire me to serve. Fortunately for America, I'm not the only person that feels this way. A decade after the attacks, Americans are still inspired to serve. As our country marks the 10-year anniversary of the attacks on our nation, we remember and we commemorate the lives lost on that day. We also honor the sacrifices made every day since then by our military and their families, as our armed forces have taken the fight to the enemy, so the fight is not in our backyard. Not since the greatest generation has so few sacrificed so much for so many. The NASA family was not immune from these emotions nor their daily responsibilities. And in a fashion typical of the history of this agency, it provided hope and inspiration in moments of crisis. The NASA family knows that in the pursuit of excellence, tragedy can occur. But when it does, the family grieves, but always rises up to even greater heights. The International Space Station captured the images of the smoke emanating from Ground Zero. Those iconic images conveyed to the world the depth of the devastation. But we must not forget that in the midst of the tragedy, the men and women of NASA kept operations going, which is not an easy thing to do on a normal day, let alone on a day like 9/11. That day, the International Space Station was operating overhead as it has done every day, continuously for more than 10 years. And today, on another planet, our Mars rover contains aluminum recovered from the World Trade Center. If that is not an example of rising to new heights, nothing is. America knows there are risks going into outer space. But on September 11th, 2001, we didn't quite realize that men and women face a terrible risk just going to work or boarding an airplane. But from that terrible day, we have all recommitted ourselves toward a common goal to make this nation the greatest of all, freer, safer, and stronger. The men and women of NASA continue to contribute to that common objective, and I thank you for your efforts. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mr. Matthew Fogg. Mr. Fogg retired from the United States Marshal Service as a Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal with 34 years of public service. During a vacation trip to New York City in September 2001, He selflessly responded to the attacks on the World Trade Center by serving as a first responder, organizing search and rescue teams and leading the teams of courageous Americans to find those lost in the destruction. Mr. Fogg?
I want to first thank NASA Administrator Charles Bowden and Ms. Ruth McWilliams for presenting this heartfelt memorial to NASA personnel worldwide in honor of those who dedicated their services to America on September 11, 2001. I also want to give honor to the congressional members, astronauts, and other distinguished persons who are being recognized in this program. I would like to give special thanks to NASA employee Ms. Claudia Silva and my world-class organization colleagues of federally employed women known as FEW.org, our national president, Ms. Sue Webster, and our national vice president, Ms. Michelle Crockett, who is here today. Last but not least, I'll give honor to my family and friends who are here in support of this wonderful honor by NASA. Thank you for coming out. I would like to be brief and give my words to challenge each public servant here, my voice today and around the world, know that one day you may be called to be above and beyond the call of duty. I took an oath as the United States Marshal to protect and serve against all our enemies, foreign or domestic. But like any other federal employee, I was on special leave that day and having traveled from Washington, D.C. to New York on personal business. We all know the morning of September 11 changed Americans forever as terrorists flew passenger airlines into both the north and south towers of the World Trade Centers. I was just 48 blocks north, residing in a hotel, and amazingly, 1 block from the fire station that lost the most firefighters, 16 on that day in all. I was in my room when I observed the incident on television news, thinking it was a training tape. This couldn't be happening. Realizing it was real, I ran outside to see many folks hollering and running down the street, pointing at the World Trade Center's towers. At the time, only 1 tower was burning, and the fire department in the next block had responded already. I went back to my room, and then I saw another plane, as we all saw on TV, appear out of nowhere and crash through the second tower. Later, both the north and the south towers collapsed in what I called an unimaginable catastrophic cloud of fire and smoke. I realized many fathers, mothers, children, firefighters, and police were now dead or dying. People everywhere were saying the United States is under attack. The news was sketchy at best. I received a brief phone call from a friend who told me they evacuated the U.S. Capitol. Suddenly, the line went dead. I was unable to make any phone calls and learned later via news another plane had crashed into the Pentagon. I suddenly began to feel sick and burning desire in my stomach to help those in peril. I located an Army surplus store not far from my hotel and bought black Army military clothing and equipment. Ultimately, I began to make my way down to the destruction opposite of those running in the other way. My fiance began to cry and asked me, "Why are you going down there? It's way too dangerous. You are on special leave and are not prepared for that disaster," she said. "Matthew, you could die." And at the time, I said to her, "Tell my family that what I'm now doing is above and beyond the call of duty." And so 10 years later, I want each person listening to me know that when you get that call that someone is in need and you don't have to take action, please remember, on a 9/11, we didn't have to go in and help either, but we went in above and beyond the call of duty. Arriving in what we call the zone as ground zero, the destruction, smoke, and flames were breathtaking. I didn't know where to start. TV depictions were impossible to show actual dimensions of all the 2 huge buildings crumbling into one huge area. It was surreal. I kept repeating the Psalms 23. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art rod and thy staff, they comfort me." We were seeking to find anyone alive. I remember vividly a firefighter was rescued. Myself, many responders started clapping when he came out alive. Later, we observed our excitement was depicted in a news photo. I remember clearly, on one occasion, myself and other searchers were actually tied together with ropes, at least 50 feet underground in a large, wide space, calling for anyone to respond if they were alive. Suddenly we heard a call from other rescue workers. That part of the building was collapsing. There was nowhere to go. If the building had collapsed, I'm certain I would have died. I actually said, Lord Jesus, into thy hands I commit thy spirit. I began to continue to look around. Everyone, please repeat after me, above and beyond the call of duty. I stayed in the zone area for about 5 days. During that time, bodies were recovered and a few more people were rescued, and some responders were hurt conducting searches. But it was work that called on a special breed of men and women. We must also thank the doctors, the nurses, and all the food and supply personnel who responded. People's Weekly magazine coined the phrase best when it titled it, America Unites. Amazingly, it captured a picture of me assisting firefighters recovering the body of a New York firefighter who paid the ultimate price above and beyond the call of duty. So in closing, let me say this. I was not a New Yorker, and those people on 9/11 were strangers to me, but they were loved ones to many and others, and maybe of some of you that are here today. Just remember, you don't have to be at ground zero to know God has placed a calling on your life today. So at the direction of my voice, if ever you know someone in need, regardless of their race, gender, age, color, just as you know and now honor me for helping others on 9/11, whom I didn't know, I now ask you to be willing to go above and beyond the call of duty to help them, as we all did on that dreadful day, and be a first responder. God bless you and God bless America.
Introducing our final guest speaker is NASA Deputy Administrator Lori Garver. Deputy Administrator Garver began her current service to NASA in July 2009. Her U.S. Senate confirmation marks the second time she has worked for NASA, the first period of service being from 1996 to 2001, when she served as Special Assistant to the NASA Administrator and Associate Administrator for the Office of Policy and Plans. Deputy Administrator Garver.
Thank you, Kiki, and thank you, Mr. Fogg. It's very meaningful. It is an honor to introduce the only American who was not on Earth on September 11th in 2001 and to have him speak to us today. And while Frank Culbertson bore unique witness to that tragedy, NASA responded in many ways, and we continue to pay tribute to the 9/11 victims and their families. Immediately after the attacks, NASA science programs were called into action on behalf of the nation. The agency worked with FEMA to fly sensors over the affected areas on aircraft, looking for aerial contaminants as well as satellite resources to monitor from above. NASA flew 6,000 flags on Endeavour's next space shuttle flight to honor the victims of the attacks as well as their families, the thousands of brave men and women who contributed to the relief and recovery efforts. I think we have someone else to give our flag to today. In an effort called Flags for Heroes and Families, students working at the Johnson Space Center in Houston assembled commemorative packages, including those U.S. flags flown in space, which were then presented to the relatives of the victims on National Flag Day in 2002. Last February, the contributions of NASA and the Kennedy Space Center were stitched into the fabric of the National 9/11 flag, which was recovered near Ground Zero following the attacks. And at this very moment, as Representative Palazzo reminded us, on the dusty red surface of the planet Mars, a piece of the metal of the World Trade Center is protecting the drilling mechanism of the Opportunity rover and has been doing so for more than 7 years. Now, I just found out about this story a few weeks ago when visiting New York with the STS-135 crew and meeting with employees of a company called Honeybee Robotics. They're based in Manhattan, New York, and they just told me that they felt they wanted to do something in the weeks following the tragedy. They called the mayor's office and eventually received a box of debris and metal from the World Trade Center towers. In a gesture and a tribute to the victims and survivors, they on their own decided to adorn those metal pieces with the American flag, and they included them as a functional part of the Spirit and Opportunity rovers. It is now a symbol that our American spirit prevails. The only American who was not on Earth on September 11th, 2001, wrote a letter describing his reaction to the unfolding tragedy at the time. He said, "Other than the emotional impact of our country being attacked and thousands of our citizens and maybe some friends being killed, the most overwhelming feeling being where I am is one of isolation." While I think we all experienced a bit of isolation at that time, within a few hours, we had the opportunity to go see our families and to hug our children and hold them in our arms. And you had no such opportunity, and I cannot imagine how you were able to respond in the way that you did. While circling the Earth, you had the presence of mind to grab a video camera to document from this unique vantage point the destruction that was occurring below. In his photos and memories of that day, they have become an important part of our history and in our healing. Frank Culbertson has had an 18-year career as a NASA astronaut, logging over 144 days in space as a space shuttle commander, pilot, and station crew member. He retired from NASA in 2002 and is now Senior Vice President and Deputy General Manager with Orbital Sciences Corporation, one of our key industry partners. How appropriate it is that Frank's experience offered us a unique perspective on this terrible event. After all, that is what we do. We provide a unique and important perspective on our nation, our planet, and our universe. Thank you, Frank, for joining us at this important event. Please roll the video.
My love, more dear than this life, you are to me. Your kiss.
Get all the freaking cops away from the building. What's wrong? That's it. One check. Let's go. Bitch, remove yourselves from the location. I understand you first. Remove yourselves from the location this time. We got another tower collapse.
Please save me, I'm fallen here. I'm lost and alone. An angel weeps, I hear him cry. A lonely prayer, a voice on high. Dry all your tears, come what may, and in the end the sun will rise on one more day.
I didn't know exactly what was happening, but I knew it was really bad because there was a big cloud of debris covering Manhattan.
We flew past New York City and saw the effects of that attack on that city.
That's when it really became painful because it was like seeing a wound in the side of your country, of your family, your friends. I was visiting Williamsburg and there was a veteran touring the grounds. He needed a little help up one of the sets of steps, and so I helped him a little bit, and we started talking, and I told him I had seen the attack on Afghanistan from above. And then I told him I was the commander of the space station, and he immediately started asking questions and wanted to know more. This is a guy who lost part of the use of an arm, he's lost both his legs, his life has changed dramatically. However, the first thing he said to me is, that's one of the best things we're doing. We have to work together internationally or we'll never solve all these problems. The young men and women that are putting their lives on the line in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places around the world to ensure that this doesn't happen again and to help keep us free are the real heroes here. I think it's important for people to continue to learn the lessons from this and make sure that we are, in fact, making ourselves a better country as a result of it, not regressing or turning inward or changing ourselves into a society that we won't be proud to pass on to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I had the privilege to talk to a school that was a couple of blocks away from Ground Zero and meet those kids and teachers in person. They were close to Ground Zero, but they were optimistic, and that's our future.
The sun will rise on one more day.
Good morning, and thank you very much. And Laurie, thank you very much for that introduction. That was amazing. Brought back a lot of memories, as does the video. Every year, actually almost every day, I think about what I saw from the space station on 9/11, but certainly at this time of year, it comes home to me. And I remember what I felt like. I remember all the people that I communicated with. I remember my crewmates, Mikhail and Vladimir, who also felt the pain of this. They were worried about their own country because they had already had terrorist attacks in Moscow and other parts of Russia. And we all spent a lot of time checking with our families and making sure they were okay. And we talked together a lot about the significance of what we had seen. And they worked as hard as I did, taking photographs and videos of what was happening in our country. And as Marshal Fogg said, sometimes you had to be prepared to do things you didn't expect you ever would have to do. I certainly never expected to take pictures like that, but I also never expected to have to talk to people on Earth and explain what I had seen and what it meant to me. I talked to hundreds, if not thousands, of school children from space. They asked their questions about the space station and about traveling in space, but they also asked about what I saw and how it made me feel. So I had to go over it quite often. I talked to leaders of countries around the world who were sympathetic to what had happened, but who wanted to express their support and ask their questions. When we were doing our physical exams on that day, and I called the ground to report the results of that, Dr. Steve Hart came on the line, and I said, "Hey, Steve, how's it going?" He said, "Well, Frank, we're not having a very good day down here on Earth." And my heart stopped for a moment, because just the way he said it, I knew something bad was going on. Didn't know if maybe a family member was seriously ill or worse, or NASA had lost an airplane or somebody. And then he began to describe what had happened at the World Trade Center. And just prior to the call, the plane had hit the Pentagon, and he told me about that. And while we were talking, he told me about the airplane crashing in Pennsylvania. And it was clear to me that we were under attack. And so we did find a camera, and we did look down on New York City, Michael and I both, and Vladimir from a different window, and we recorded what we saw. But it was very painful to see. I assumed that tens of thousands of people were dying, not knowing exactly the situation there or what time it was. I knew approximately, but I hadn't done the mental math at that time of what time zone we were in. But as we zoomed in with the camera, you could see the big cloud enveloping New York City, and we were watching the second tower come down. We didn't know it at the time. I just knew it was getting worse, and it looked really bad. And traveling 5 miles a second, New York goes across the horizon very quickly, and it was a long 90 minutes to come back around and check out my country again and see if anything else was happening. And we were very worried, and we talked a lot about what was really going on and what this meant during that long 90 minutes. But in that time, we also set up every camera we had, and we took as many pictures as we could. We came across Chicago, and looking across the Midwest, went right across Purdue, where I had a daughter in school, and looked down to make sure everything was okay in that area. We couldn't see anything in Pennsylvania. The smoke had already dissipated, and I could see all the way to Texas, and was making sure there was no smoke down that way where a lot of the family was, into the Carolinas where the rest of them were. And as we crossed Washington, we were directly over the Pentagon, and we could look straight down and see the gash in the side of the building. We could, through the binoculars and the long lenses, see the lights of the rescue vehicles, and we knew it was really bad there too. And then as we went across the eastern shore and out over the Atlantic, I could clearly see New York City again and see the smoke coming towards us, and took some more video. And it just really hurt, and it was hard to know what to do next. As we circle the Earth every 90 minutes and we crossed the U.S. and we were getting very sporadic pieces of information, I looked down on the U.S. and normally the Earth looks inhabited. You know, you can see a lot of things happening down here. You can see the contrails of all the airliners going across the U.S. and coming from Europe towards the U.S. and all around the world, and a lot of them converge right over Atlanta, it seems like. But as we came around about 3 hours after the attacks began, they all disappeared, except for one or two. One of them was coming back to Washington, carrying President Bush, and then there were a few from F-15s and F-18s around the country that were patrolling. But that was it. They had all disappeared. They had grounded everybody in just a few hours. And that, to me, was an amazing sight to see, and really drove home the fact that this was a different world now, and I was going to come home to a different place. Not really knowing for sure when that would be or what it would be like. We just knew it would be different. We had to press on with our mission. We had a module that was arriving in 6 days that we had to get safely docked to the station, get it activated. We had our own agenda we had to follow and our own timeline just to keep the station flying, because at that time it was very small and somewhat fragile. We only had one large solar array and a couple of small ones, and 6 modules, and just the 3 of us up there, so we were busy. But we kept working, and as you do at times like this, you compartmentalize and you get the job done. But the best part of it is I could tell people on the ground were pulling together, and I could tell that the family was supporting each other. And at the end of the first day, Roy Estes came on the line. He was a center director at JSC at the time, and he said, "Frank, I want you to know, we've checked on your family, and you're going to talk to your wife in a few minutes, and we checked on your kids, and everybody here is committed to keeping you and Vladimir and Mikhail safe. And we're going to make sure your mission continues, and we're going to do our job down here on Earth." And I said, "Well, it's got to be pretty distracting, Roy." And he says, "It's incredibly distracting, Frank, but these people are committed down here, and they're going to take care of you." I had no doubt about that. I knew that my Capcoms, Barbara and Katie, who were talking to me that day and telling me as much as they could, our flight directors, Mark Faring, Mark Kirisich, Brian Lunny, others, our support team, TJ Creamer, Missy Gard, Jesse Gilmore, others were taking care of us. Dr. Hart and his medical team and the psych support folks watching out for the families. And it was an amazing coming together of people who knew their jobs, they knew what to do, but they never thought they'd have to do this kind of stuff, but they figured it out. And later that night, I did talk to Rebecca, and she had talked to every one of the kids, and they were frightened, but okay. And I said, "I'm not sure, when we'll be coming back." And she said, "It's okay. I'm taking care of things here," and she did. And so we kept on with our mission. The next day, I got a call from the ground on the secure loop again, and it was Dr. Hart, and then TJ got on the line, and he said, "Frank, I got some more bad news for you." I knew, with as many people as I know in the military and who fly airplanes and who work in New York City, that I probably knew somebody who was impacted in some way by this. And the first one I heard about was my classmate, Chick Burlingame, class of 1971 from the Naval Academy. He and I played in the drum and bugle corps together. We studied aerospace engineering together, and we both were F-4 pilots and trained at the same time. Chick was the captain of American Airlines Flight 77 that was crashed into the Pentagon. And I knew he must have gone down fighting. I didn't know any of the details, but I just envisioned that. Chick was a great fighter pilot, and I'm sure that he didn't give up his airplane readily. But it made it very personal at that point. And I started thinking about how angry I was that this had happened and taken my friend and taken families. And it was you go through the phases of grief, and the anger came pretty quickly after it became so personal. About 4 weeks later, I was always watching the Middle East because we had heard where the attack came from and who was responsible. And you could always tell when you were flying over Afghanistan because there were no lights. Excuse me, the rest of the Middle East was pretty well lit up, but not Afghanistan. And then I was watching one night as we flew overhead, and I knew something was probably going to happen before too long. And so I would watch intently, and I saw these big flashes start to go off on the ground. And they were cruise missiles hitting key targets down there. And there were strings of bombs from the B-52s going off. And I knew that my friends and colleagues were retaliating. I had classmates who were commanding the fleets and commanding the divisions on the ground. And then, again, it was very personal, but I was very proud of our troops and what they were doing. And so every opportunity I've had since then, I try to let them know when I see them that I appreciate their sacrifice. And the thing I want all you to remember is that we are now, thanks to that attack, as bad as it was, building another greatest generation. The men and women who are fighting for our freedoms overseas, who are making sure here in the homeland that we're safe, and who are dealing with this either physically or emotionally or professionally every day, are building a capability that will make this country stronger. All we have to do is tap it and let those folks lead. We need to overcome the politics, the partisanship. We need to remember why this event brought us together and why we were able to work so well together. And let that generation come up behind us and take the reins, because they have been through a trial by fire. The folks who survived 9/11, the folks who have survived the global war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the folks who are taking care of us here at home know how to lead. So we need to respect them and help them do that job better. And we need to step up and do our part to make sure that we all stay safe. But even more than that, that we keep our eye on the future. And what we're doing here at NASA is a great example of proving to the rest of the world that you cannot hold us back. You cannot keep us from excelling. You cannot keep us from pushing our frontiers outward. No matter what you do, we will always excel, we will always succeed, and we will always push those frontiers to the next level. I really appreciate everything everybody in NASA is doing. I certainly appreciate what everybody did to keep me safe in orbit and to bring me home safely, especially in time for Christmas. And I really appreciate the folks that are fighting to keep our freedom here at home and abroad. Charlie, Lori, you got a great team here. It's great to continue working with you, and it's fantastic to be a part of this family. Brothers and sisters, you got a big job ahead of you in the next few years. Let's get off this planet for good. Let's get out into the solar system and out into the universe and learn all we can about it. Because as my friend Johnny Jones, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, said, the only way we're going to solve all these problems is by international collaboration and communication. We've got to talk to each other. We've got to show the way. Thank you all very much.
On behalf of the NASA Administrator and Deputy Administrator, thank you to both the members of the NASA community and to our distinguished guests for attending this ceremony of commemoration.